In the aftermath of the Al-Quds rally at Toronto's Queen's Park earlier this month, what did we learn? Well, if you had to make a movie about the event, you could entitle it The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Let's start with the good. Both the pro and anti-Al-Quds crowds, while vocal and sometimes profane, did not cross the line into all-out violence. Also, that de rigueur, albeit pornographic anti-Israel chant of Jews back to the ovens was thankfully absent. After all, the Al-Quds people tend to tone down their rhetoric when they know they're being recorded. It was also heartwarming to see expatriate Iranians at the rally who were in solidarity with groups such as the Jewish Defense League in shouting down the Al-Quds fanatics. Now, the bad. Queen's Park still has a lot of explaining to do in allowing the rally to take place. After all, when this nonsense started a few years ago, Queen's Park Sergeant-at-Arms Dennis Clark willfully turned a blind eye to the code of conduct at Queen's Park, which prohibits hate speech. Now, personally, I have a profound issue with the very concept of so-called hate speech. For me, the line in the sand is when violence or death is advocated against a specific individual or group. Yet, nevertheless, Queen's Park has an existing policy forbidding its grounds to be used as a venue for hateful speech. The Code of Conduct strictly forbids, quote, illegal signs or speeches such as obscenity or hate propaganda, end quote. Calling Israel a racist state and an apartheid state certainly meets Queen's Park's benchmark for hate propaganda. Also, would Queen's Park have allowed a rally on its grounds if the group seeking permission was, say, the Ku Klux Klan or some neo-Nazi organization? We all know the answer to that query. You see, it's easy to say no to hateful white folks, not so easy to say no to hateful Islamist groups. And that's because the cowards in charge, folks, are terrified about being labeled as Islamophobic. You see, for the progressives, it's all about optics. Many of the pro-Al-Quds demonstrators are brown-skinned. They wear strange clothes. They speak with an accent. Case closed. By the way, let us not forget the origin of Al-Quds Day. Al-Quds is the Arabic word for Jerusalem, and it was initiated by that Iranian mass murderer Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979. The real agenda behind Al-Quds Day was to undermine the Camp David Accords signed by Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. True to form, Khomeini's message was not one of peace and reconciliation. Rather, he wanted his murderous followers to, quote, rise, destroy Israel, and replace it with the heroic Palestinian nation, end quote. Alas, the real ongoing agenda of Al-Quds Day is to energize the various radicals from Shia Hezbollah to the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, those who long for the day in which Canada will be an Islamist state governed by Sharia law. I truly fear they're getting closer to their goal with every passing year. And finally, the ugly. Sadly, so many of the Islamists bust into Queen's Park demonstrated an irrational hatred for Jews in Israel. I say this because if I believe for a single second that rebranding Israel as Palestine and telling the Jews to relocate would solve all of the problems in the Middle East, I might even support the Al-Quds side myself. But come on, who's kidding who here? Even savvy Palestinians know that the tears being shed for them by their fellow Muslims are of the crocodilian variety. If there were no Jews and there was no state of Israel, the Middle East would still exist as a cesspool of intolerance and dictatorship. So it is that on the Arab street, the Jews play the role of convenient scapegoat, while the Palestinians make for superb pawns. Anyone who tells you otherwise is simply being disingenuous. By the way, just a few blocks away from Queen's Park, the annual Dyke March was being held, right around the same time the Al-Quds zealots and their allies were spewing their hatred. It's very trendy for the progressives to embrace anti-Israeli policies, even though Israel is the only country in the Middle East that stages gay pride parades. But what the social justice warriors fail to understand, or perhaps choose to ignore, is that they are allying themselves with people who vehemently reject the Western values that they supposedly embrace. You know, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, women's rights, and yes, gay rights. Suffice to say, if the Al-Quds people were to get their way, job one would be shutting down those LGBT parades just a stone's throw away from Queen's Park, in a province governed by a woman who is openly lesbian. Ugly indeed, as well as perversely ironic. For the Rebel.media, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.